friends, welcome to my phone interview tips and experience video. I just made a video about the application process and my WBI, my web-based interview, so if you want to go look at that, you can look at it later or click over, do whatever the heck you want. In this video, I will be talking about some interview tips as well as my experience, more heavily on my experience. Just want to talk about that. If you're interested in the DCP, you've probably seen a ton of interview tips. I know I watched a lot, and I tried not to watch too many because a lot of people are like, don't watch more than 2 or something like that. So when I was taking the web-based interview, I was clicking through and I was in the last section. If you know anything about the web-based interview, you would know that it's really long process. It's like 40 minutes long, I think, or 30. And when you take it, you don't really know when it's going to end. When you hit that last section, it'll ask questions about yourself, being in Florida, like if it's going to be okay for you to move, are you able to live with roommates, and so on and so on. After that, you don't know if it's going to stop at a certain point, or if you just can keep going, or if it's going to tell you if you got a phone interview, or if it's going to tell you that they're not looking to hire you yet. When I was going through the last section, it stopped abruptly and told me that I had to schedule my phone interview, which I was so excited to get. I was not expecting that at all. When I got the email to schedule my phone interview, I had to go onto the dashboard, I think, or it sends you a link that you have to click, and then it gives you options to schedule your phone interview. And I believe it says you have 3 days to schedule your phone interview before they think that you don't want to do that. When I looked on there, I wanted to schedule it immediately. I wanted to just pick a date and be ready for it. When I was on there, it gave me only 3 dates, which was kind of weird, but I wanted to schedule it right there, right then. So in the end, I decided to go for Valentine's Day. I scheduled it on February 14th at 6:45 p.m., which would be 7:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Real quick, I wanted to talk about some tips that helped me and that I picked up from other YouTubers of the Disney community. One thing that was very consistent with people was to smile. Even my career advisor that helped me with my application and job experience and whatnot said that it was really important to show they can't see you face to face, so they want to hear it in your voice, and you want to be excited. Like, who wouldn't want to be excited if you want to work for Disney, of course? My career advisor helped me do a mock interview for the before the phone interview. So a week before, we scheduled to meet together, and she wrote down some questions that she did her own research about the DCP, and we had a face-to-face interview. And what she did was she wrote down my answers for what I responded with, and then at the end, she read the question, and then she read my answers back to me, which really helped me hear what I was saying. And then I was able to say, okay, that was not a good answer, let's change it. And she told me, okay, let's say this, this, and this. It'll help get the point across for certain things. This allowed me to just freely speak about certain things on what to add to what I could possibly say to my recruiter. The mock interview really helped, so that is one piece of advice that I would give to you watching this video is, if you get that phone interview, call up a friend, call your parents, talk to any advisor from school, and ask if they can read some questions with you and do a mock interview for this really important experience you want. When I was prepping for the phone interview, some people were saying, oh, I had lists and lists of notes, and I used index cards. A lot of people were saying do not do pages and pages of notes. Just have maybe 1 or 2 sheets of paper, some index cards to help you remember some things to tell your recruiter. So for me, I had only 1 sheet of paper that had reasons why I wanted to do the Disney College program. I had a section for me to write down my recruiter's name. I also had my top 5 roles. I originally had 3, but then I thought maybe they'll ask about more than just 3, which he did. I also wrote down smile just to remind myself my voice needs to be my expression of how excited I would be to work for the Disney College program, work for Disney, and so on. And I also used 6 or 8 index cards just to help me remind myself of certain scenarios that I could use for examples for when a recruiter would ask, tell me about a time when such and such happened. I thought that was really helpful. My career advisor actually advised that to me, to write down or come up with scenarios or examples that I had gone through during my work experience. For example, my recruiter asked about an emergency, so I sort of knew that they were going to ask that, so I wrote down a situation that happened in my past work experience. It really helped me remember that story, and I was able to explain to him what happened. Here's actually what my sheet looks like. So I have smile, I have my recruiter's name. I actually wrote Happy Valentine's Day. I wanted to say Happy Valentine's Day to the recruiter that I had, but I totally forgot because I was so focused on questions. And then this is my list of reasons why I want to do the DCP. I have my roles, and I explained how my job experience or my volunteer experience would help me with the roles that I picked. Alright, so now I'm just going to go right into some of the questions and the scenarios that we talked about in my phone interview. And I also had Will. The reason why some people might say to write down your recruiter's name is, first of all, so you can remember it, but also for when you remember it later on, you can say, oh, thank you, I had Will, so I should have said, thank you, Will, for interviewing me, or thank you for your time, Will. Some people just say, it's just makes you look good. Unfortunately, I forgot to say thank you, Will, but I did remember his name. He was very nice, by the way. You may see tons of versions of questions that people may be asked, and one of them is, why do you want to do the Disney College program? So the way he phrased that for me was, why do you want to join the DCP over all other internships? So I explained to him, you know, this is a great company. In the beginning, my recruiter, even before asking me about why I would want to work there, is just double checking all my information, like my personal information, like where I live, what my email is, and so and so. They wanted to make sure that all of that was correct. Later on, he asked me if I was comfortable with living with roommates, and which I was, and if I had ever had, I think before that he even asked if I had ever had a roommate, and if so, was there ever a time we had a conflict, and how did we overcome that conflict? I explained to him that I had roommates before, and I was really close with one of them, and we've had plenty of conflicts, and we had to talk about it and whatnot. So after those questions, he went on to talk about teamwork, and he asked me a question about telling him about a time that somebody wasn't pulling their weight in a certain scenario when we were working as a team. So on the spot, I really could not think of a time when somebody wasn't pulling their weight, so I just went ahead and went with saying that when I was volunteering, everybody in that group has a job to do. There's not one person that just gets to stand around and watch. Everybody pulls their weight. And so later on, when I was thinking about this question, I realized that there was a time that this happened, but I just could not think of that at the time. So kind of implementing the idea that when you're kind of thinking about some of the questions that they might ask, it's good to have scenarios or examples that you have experienced to tell the recruiters, of course, because they're going to ask you that. But not just have one, but maybe have a couple if you can think of any. So I think that's really important. Another question that he said, tell me about a time we had to resolve an emergency and how did you handle it? How I handled it was professionally and calmly took charge of the situation and made sure the customer or guest, whoever you want to call them, was directed towards just a manager basically, and made sure that they were immediately talking with them, if that makes sense, sorry. So we talked about me being a cashier and being a seater a lot. So another question he asked was, tell me about a time when you had to settle a dispute with a customer. As a cashier, I guess really anywhere in retail, you're always going to have a situation with a customer, and that majority of the time I did have to handle it on my own, is what I was telling him. And sometimes there were situations that were out of my control that I did have to get a manager involved. So that was my answer, and I thought it was pretty good. So when we got to the section about roles, we talked about 7, aside from seating position as well as merchandise, if you will. Aside from being a cashier and being a host, or as we would say, merchandise and a seater, we talked about 6 other roles, which were children's activities, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique, housekeeping and house person, photo pass, recreation attractions, and costuming operations. There were quite a few questions I was really prepared for, surprisingly, just because I didn't know what questions they were going to be asking. I had put in interest in a lot of roles, so I was really open to whatever questions they were going to be asking. So with saying that, he asked me for children's activities, what would I do if I was in a room filled of 20 kids and there was no games and no toys to play with? And I just simply said that I would play a game of Simon Says. And right when he asked that, I was like, oh, I read this question on a list that I saw, and being prepared is very important. There is probably a link or a website that has just 100-some questions about anything about the DCP in any of the roles, basically. If you just fill those out one day, or just break it up into sections and just look over them, like skim them, it's gonna be okay. Like, because when I saw that, I was like, oh, I remember that question, I'm gonna say this. So it gives you time to really think about, how would you answer this? So, and with my answer, I said Simon Says. He was asking about how would you get kids to play if they didn't want to, if they were a little shy, or something along the lines of that. And I said Simon Says would allow some kids to be leaders, and if they wanted to be Simon, they could play as Simon. If they want to play as a follower, that is okay too. Like, it would be a big group of kids. So I thought that was a pretty good answer. We talked about Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique. Another question that I was prepared for, and this question I actually did have to look up because I have not a lot of experience with this, but he asked, what would you do if a parent came up to you and said they don't like the hairstyle and makeup that you did for their child? And so I just said I would ask them what I could change, go from there, basically. So the next role that we talked about was house person and housekeeper. House person, I believe, is a new addition this season, and it's basically housekeeping. So the question that he asked me for this role was, would I feel comfortable with cleaning up after people? And I just simply explained that having childcare experience really taught me to be cleaning up after a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old like all day. I think that answer kind of worked for that role. Now, I think we talked about costuming operations next. It gets kind of fuzzy because it all happened at once. I'm surprised that I remembered a lot of these questions. But he asked me why I was interested in costuming, and that I was not ready for, and so I had to come up with something on the fly. And what I said basically was, I was in theater when I was in high school, and I found doing theater things or just costuming was really interesting, and just being involved with that club or class was just really fun. That was what kind of worried me, because I was like, I did not answer that well. The next role I think we talked about was photo pass, which I was really excited about. I was so happy that he asked me about this. Even though I didn't get the photo pass role, it was still fun to talk about it. He asked me what kind of photography experience that I had, So I just mentioned that when I was in high school I did yearbook, so I was in charge of taking photos to visually represent what the year looked like, but I also mentioned that I did my brother's senior photos. So then he went on to ask, what would I do if a guest rejected my services? This question hit me and I was like, I don't know what he meant. So I simply asked, I was like, what do you mean by reject services? And he responded, how would you react if a customer did not want their photo taken? And I just simply said that I would respect their choices. If they want their photo taken, I would be right there if they needed it, and I'm sure like anybody that was around, they would help too. I thought that was a pretty good answer. I just felt kind of silly because I didn't know like the first round when he asked that, but it's okay. This last role that we talked about was recreation attractions. This is where I started tripping up, and I was freaking out when I was talking about this. He was saying recreation attractions includes many variety of things. For example, spa and fitness area. I think he said water slide operations or something with water, and something else. I was not expecting this question at all, and I didn't know where the question was going to end up. And so after he listed those three main things, he asked, of the three, which one would I be most interested in? And I was like, oh my god, I don't remember any of the three that he just listed. So I was like, oh, could you repeat the first one? And he said, oh, of course, the fitness and spa center. And I was like, oh, that's the one I'd be most interested in. And I was just like, in my head, I was freaking out. I was just like, oh god, oh god, oh god. He's like, and why would you be interested in that one? And I was just like, oh my god, I have to come up with something. So I just said, I really enjoy fitness, which I do. I do like fitness to an extent. And I just said, I really like helping people. So that was my answer, and he was like, oh, okay, cool. And then when he was like trying to think of more questions, I was just like, oh no, oh no. After that was basically the interview. He asked me if I had any questions for him, which I did. I asked 2 questions, which I thought was pretty good. I'm sure a lot of recruiters get, how did you get involved with Disney? So I asked him that, and he told me that 20 years ago he basically started out where I was, applying for the DCP, and then worked his way up to become a recruiter, of course. Then I asked what was his favorite part about working for Disney, and he said he was working in the parks for so long that he wanted to move up in employment, so he became a recruiter. So that was really interesting to learn, and I was like, that's awesome, thank you so much, and whatnot. That's basically where the interview ended, and I did not say thank you, Will, like so many people say, but that's okay because I got in, so it's okay. In the end, my interview was only 16 minutes long, and that kind of freaked me out, but at the same time I was like, we hit a lot of points in that interview. We talked a lot within those 16 minutes. He did a lot of the talking, but that's okay. He ended up calling 5 minutes before my actual time of the interview. Disney will tell you that you gotta prepare 15 minutes in advance because they could call within a 30-minute range. So since mine was 6:45, he could have called at 6:30 or even 7 o'clock. I've heard people probably do like even an hour later or something like that. But yeah, it's good to be really prepared. But I did get accepted. I accepted. I got the acceptance email February 27th. Let me tell you. So the couple days after my interview, the first hour after my interview, I was so excited. I was like, I think I did really well. I think I have this, and I was so confident. And then my confidence was going down and down and down, like days after my interview. And I was like, oh man, now I kept thinking of things, oh, I should have said it this way, I should have said it that way. But all in all, I was very pleased with how my interview went. So, and in the end I got in, so that's pretty good, you know. Anyways, I hoped you enjoyed this video, and if any of the tips in the beginning helped, I really hope it did. And if any of the questions that were asked to me and I answered, hopefully like could give you an idea of what they might ask you, or some answers you can think about to answer in the future. Overall, I just hope this kind of helped, and it was just fun to talk about what happened in my interview and what will help you, hopefully, and help me in my future as well. So, with all that being said, please like this video, please subscribe. I am Fall Quick Service Food and Beverage DCP 2018. I'm really excited. I've said this many a time, but I've never been to Disney World nor Disneyland, so this is going to be a huge new experience for me, because a lot of the Disney college programmers have already been to Disney, whether it was for a family vacation last year or when they were kids. They've been to Disney. For me, I've never stepped foot in Disney, so I'm just really excited like what it's all going to be. Not even just like playing in the parks after work, just actually working there. So I'm really excited. So I hope you can join me on this really cool journey and see what it's like with me. Yeah. So I will see you real soon, and bye. Roasted. Okay.